Hello, everyone, and welcome to this session at the 2025 Hunger Free Communities Virtual Summit. I'm Minerva Delgado, Director of Coalitions and Advocacy at the Alliance to End Hunger. I'm joined by my colleague, Amanda Bankston. Amanda, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. Thank you, Minerva. My name is Amanda Bankston. I'm a researcher. I direct a policy lab at the University of Washington and also am a doctoral student at Syracuse University, who's had the privilege of working with Minerva and the Alliance around the HFC network for the past about 4 years.
Thanks, Amanda. This session is Hunger is Solvable, Cooperation is Key. And in this session, you'll be learning about the Hunger Free Communities Network, our theory of change, and frameworks for growing and monitoring your anti-hunger efforts. And so we're really excited to be able to present this content. And what we hope to impart today is about the Hunger Free Communities Network, about our theory of change, and what are some shared learnings around this work and how to get involved with the Alliance to End Hunger and the Hunger Free Communities Network. So first, I'll start with just an overview of what is the Hunger Free Communities Network. So the Alliance to End Hunger started the Hunger Free Communities Network and our Hunger Free Community Initiative over a decade ago. This conference is actually our signature program throughout the year. And so really excited to share this information with you. For those of you who are new to the Alliance and the Hunger Free Communities Network. Really happy that you're with us to learn more. So the network is really what we think of as a community of practice. We're currently partnering with about 75 groups in 34 states across the country. All of them are anti-hunger organizations and or coalitions, and they work on a variety of different topics related to food security in their communities. And what we do at the Hunger Free Communities Network is bring all those groups together in a virtual space where we can learn from one another, deepen our understanding of hunger, and share those learnings at the federal level with our legislative leaders, as well as leaders in the food security space at USDA and other related programs. We also work to build the capacity of our network partners. We do that through convenings, we do regional meetups, as well as just regular meetings of the network where we're sharing with one another and learning from one another, as well as a grant program, a relatively new grant program for the last 2 years here at the Alliance to End Hunger, where we're providing small grants to our Hunger Free community partners to advance their goals around the Hunger Free Communities Impact Framework, which you'll be learning about in this session. And so all of this is really to improve the opportunity for groups to increase their impact and the work that they're doing to create hunger-free communities. And in terms of the work that we do, we really espouse collective impact as a framework that can help move this work along. And so I'll turn it back to Amanda to just discuss collective impact theory.
Thank you, Minerva. So we really came together around this idea of collective impact. And so there are many scholars like myself who study the collaborative process. In other words, how people work together in their communities to tackle pressing issues. And while there are a number of ways to look at the structures, the mechanics and mechanisms and dynamics within collaboratives, one of the popular ways that we look at this is Kania and Kramer's collective impact theory. It essentially gives us 5 ingredients to think about when we enter collaboration. One is when you bring multi-sector partners together, we have a common agenda. The second, really importantly, we have shared measurement. In other words, we're measuring things in the same way. Third, mutually reinforcing activities. Fourth, continuous communication. That's really important in collaboration. And fifth, backbone support. In other words, an anchor organization or a piece that's looking at how all of the pieces fit together. And this is important because we know that no one organization, entity, or person can solve hunger on their own. So this becomes the foundation for the theory of change that Minerva will tell you a little bit about the HFC collective impact framework.
Thank you, Amanda. So, when we started working with our hunger free community partners at the Alliance to End Hunger, one of the first things we did was think about what is our theory of change. Um, and we developed the Hunger Free Communities Impact Framework in consultation with many of our partners across the country and those who were doing this work and those who had experience doing this work. And so, what we put together, I'll walk through quickly what the impact framework is, and it provides us at the Alliance with some benchmarks for us to measure impact and progress, but it also provides a framework for community groups, community coalitions who want to work on ending hunger in their communities to emulate. So first, this we start with the awakening. Which is just recognition of low food security in a community. So when typically what we see in communities is when groups start to try to address this issue of hunger, they're really looking at addressing the issue of low food security. And so typically what we see is hunger relief organizations and efforts get started. Sometimes those are established by nonprofits, sometimes by government agencies. Sometimes it's faith groups. So we see many faith groups in the space that have feeding ministries, start soup kitchens and food pantries. And of course, there's the entire network of Feeding America food banks, over 200 food banks across the country that participate in this as well. So typically in the responding phase, you see lots of different efforts in the community to address food security, but typically those are uncoordinated hunger relief efforts and typically are working in silos. In the next stage of development for the Hunger Free Communities Impact Framework is the coalescing phase. And this is where we see convening of key stakeholders around this concept of creating a hunger free community. And groups can do this at the county level, at the city level, at the state level, sometimes regionally. But, typically there's an identification of a sort of a service area where groups come together and say, hey, we should really work together to create a hunger-free community or hunger-free community efforts. And so typically what we see is a convening, which is a call to action by a strategic leader. And those strategic leaders are found all over. Sometimes it's a funder who brings people together. Sometimes it's an elected official. Sometimes it's community members or social service organizations, or maybe the food bank in the county or the state who says we need to bring people together and work broadly across sectors to identify the issues that need to be addressed here to address hunger in our community. And then in the formalizing stage, I'm sorry, I'm going backwards. In the formalizing stage, we start to see groups identify as part of a Hunger Free Communities initiative. These initiatives have many different names. It can be an anti-hunger coalition. It could be a hunger-free coalition. It can be something else that has, a different title. It could be a food policy organization. But groups start to come together and identify as part of a collective effort to end hunger in the community. And we start to see the levels of cooperation and coordination, formalization of coordinating efforts. So we typically see it could be food pantries in a community all get together and decide that they're going to work collaboratively to make sure that they are open during different times so people can use their services, identify where gaps are that they need to fill in terms of service delivery, that kind of thing. So that's the formalizing stage where there is groups start to coordinate and come together. In the maturing stage, we start to see a sustainable network, and this is where groups have built up political and social capital. A lot of this is through advocacy, raising awareness of hunger in their communities, but we also start to see really high level cross-sector food systems coordination and high level of, communication at this stage as well. So typically we really start to see coordination among anti-hunger efforts to avoid duplication of effort and to eliminate programmatic gaps. So at this stage, groups have gone through a process where they've identified what are the needs in the community, who are the players, where are the assets that we can build up to eliminate gaps in service, and how can we reduce duplication of effort. And so that's what we think of as the maturing stage for a hunger-free community initiative. Finally, the performing stage, which is, sort of the aspirational stage, where we hope to see the community achieve high food security. So people measure this in different ways, but it could be a decrease in the official food security measure for their community, or other metrics that they use. Some communities have used the meal gap as a metric here, but there is a way to monitor and evaluate the progress towards achieving higher food security in the community. And at this stage, we usually see full engagement in nutrition programs. So those nutrition programs are being utilized extensively, and we also see robust emergency food systems and crisis response. We know that even in a community where you have high food security, emergencies can happen, whether those be natural disasters or, maybe a major employer leaves the area that causes a food security crisis in the community. And so that's what we consider the performing stage. That is the aspirational goal for the coalitions that we work with. And I'll turn it over back to Amanda at this stage. So we've been working with Amanda to really think through how do we refresh this impact framework and talk more about what it looks like to implement this on the ground in communities. So Amanda, I'll turn it back over to you.
Yes, thank you, Minerva. And so the first step when we started working together to ask this question of how does this HFC impact framework align with existing studies and knowledge around community-based collaboration and coalition building? So a lot of people look at kind of the life cycle of collaboration. And as Minerva just described, when you're at different stages of a collaborative process, it requires different things of you and of the community. And to lead those processes, it's really helpful to understand how to navigate those moments. And so what did we do? We looked across the literature, both great literature and scholarly literature, as a first step to identify 119 case studies. These ranged in maturity or maturation from 1 to 50 years of working together in communities across the globe. We looked at 34 peer-reviewed studies. And they use 9 theoretical frameworks. So we talked about collective impact theory, but there are many other ways you can look at collaborative governance, coalition building, the policy process to describe the ways that folks kind of work together. And this wasn't just unique to the food and nutrition security space. We looked across policy domains, the environmental space, for example, the health space, to say, really, what do we know about how coalitions evolve over time? And not to bury the lead, you're looking at a slide that says, hey, this kind of stepwise progression of, hey, we're awakening and now we're responding and now we're coalescing is not at all what it feels like to collaborate in real time. In fact, this work from Ulibarri and colleagues we use to illustrate here that looked at a number of collaboratives tells us that it feels much more like a roller coaster ride. We don't always go from awakening as a group, in other words, coming together, realizing that we need to collaborate, to then responding and then coalescing with ease. In fact, we are constantly stopping and starting as the system context throws things at us. So this loop-de-loo roller coaster ride, what it's showing you is groups as they moved, and again, people use different words depending on which theoretical frameworks they use, but along the bottom, you're seeing the HFC impact framework steps. And along the top, they map pretty well to some other frameworks people use. So awakening and responding looks something like activation and collectivity. Institutionalizations really looking at like coalescing and formalizing. And then when you get to stability, decline, and change, we're really talking about, in some cases, those aspirational goals like performing and maturing. And so what we're showing you here is that groups don't just move through this smoothly. Sometimes they have to reorient, sometimes they have to re-engage, and sometimes they reinvent themselves. But think about how collaboration has worked in your life. You might have the first time working with someone or a new group, particularly from a different sector or perspective. At first, it's some slow work and some getting to know each other. But maybe the next time something comes up, it's much easier and much quicker to kind of move into action. And so off to the right, we're showing some key variables that have emerged that tell us when people are pivoting, or in other words, deciding to go into some of those loop-de-loos and how they navigate them. There's activation, and we can activation, process dynamics, evaluation, and leadership. These are 3 of the 7 or so we're looking at as we develop this framework. And if we go to the next slide, we can look at activation in particular. So we can get that next slide, Minerva. And so here, this is that first stage. So we call it awakening. They call it activation or collectivity. In this stage, how the groups come together really, really matters. What we've learned is if your group was triggered or came to be from kind of the bottom up, so a self-initiated coalition that we said, someone in the community said, we need to do this and started to do the slow work of bringing people together, that work looks much different from a group that has a mandate. In other words, there's a funder or a city or government agency that says, hey, we think this needs to happen, and we're going to bring you all to the table. Now, this is what this means. Activation and collectivity are really painful when you're working from the bottom up. It takes a lot of time. It can be super messy on the front end to figure things out, to build trust, to build your systems. But what we've seen is those groups actually perform better in the long run, because that is the connective tissue. That's the power of collaboration that you're activating. Now, those other groups that are externally directed can shoot through awakening and responding pretty quickly, right? You have some mandate, you know who needs to be at the table, you know what your goals are, but you don't always have the time to build up that trust and that, again, that connective tissue. And what that means is those groups are much more likely to go through the untimely death, the reorientation, and the recreation that you're seeing. So we say that to say the leadership and the great things that you get from the HFC network are how to build and pay attention to some of those bits on the front end and kind of find a middle way between that top down and bottom up. And we can move to our next piece around process dynamics, right? So the spaces, we know a little bit about people, but the spaces in between them can be really interesting to navigate how we work together. So let's focus on formalizing, which maps to institutionalization, that middle bit that you're seeing at the center of your screen. We've learned, of course, that consistent processes create stable collaborative dynamics. So the stops and starts, of course, we saw a lot of this during COVID times, can be really harmful to efforts in the long run. So we know that dialogue and joint action, knowledge sharing in spaces like the community of practice that Minerva and her colleagues are building, and knowing what your outputs look like and always kind of tracking them are really important components of implementation, getting things done. And finally, engagement declines over time, again, in those externally directed pieces. So you have to pay attention, even if it is externally directed, to how you engage people meaningfully throughout the process. And we can look at the next slide, where So problem definition and evaluation, that shared measurement that we talked about at the front end, becomes really important. And we don't always want to shoot for those long-term aspirational goals of performing. Those intermediate small wins are really important to keep you moving along your journey. And so the scope of challenges, right? You have your big goals and then you have your smaller tangible goals. It's really important in awakening and formalizing stages, through formalizing stages, to work through that. And then again, we can't talk enough about measurement, that the shared and consistent measurement is really the driver of us feeling good and continuing to feel like we're really making impact in community. And then we can look at the next slide. So this is my favorite thing to talk about. All of you, hopefully, who are engaging with us in this session. Leadership is the most important variable, the most important piece of the puzzle. And that's why spaces like the HFC network are so important. Fostering the emergence, the shepherding of these processes can be really, really tricky. One of the things we've learned that people have been really interested in is that we're not avoiding conflict here as leaders. In fact, the most important thing we can do is think of our work as introducing and inviting conflict into the fore, right? When we are calling together a process, we're calling different people together, we know there are going to be things to work out. And that is the point, right? That is the part of the point of working together. And then finally, one of the really interesting parts is that leadership really looks defined at the front end. We want to know who the leader is. And typically we can point to that backbone organization, or we can point to someone and say, this person is in charge. But those performing and maturing groups that we've come into contact with, it's really interesting because shared leadership emerges. And in those groups, it's really common to say who is in charge, and people scratch their heads because they're all contributing equally and all have a clear role. So in these maturing and performing phases, that shared leadership is something that's really a marker of success. In fact, we're at the front end. If I ask you who's in charge and you can't say, that might be a marker of dysfunction. And again, this is another reason why it's important for us to understand this life cycle of collaboration and why this impact framework can help you guide you along your way. And to wrap things up in terms of where we're at in our findings more broadly, we can share that your hierarchy of needs as you enter development of an HFC. And again, the orange here is novel contributions that we're kind of contributing to the literature. So we knew we needed a committee of leaders. What the HFC network shows us is that a diverse and representative group, right? So who is at the table, who gets a seat is really important. We know we need formal institutional arrangements, in other words, kind of the rules of engagement, a data-driven, right? Again, that shared measurement strategic plan. We know we need clear delegation of roles and responsibilities, and that consistent, continuous communication, keeping everyone in the light and not in the dark. But there are two pieces that really are interesting about what the HFC network explores together. One is effective conflict transformation, leaning in and not away to this idea of conflict and how we work through it. And really, really importantly, having systems for continuous social learning, right? This is an art and not a science of navigating this leadership. Collective advocacy is something that really emerges as important. So not just what we do within a collaborative, how we go come together in an intermediate way. And then finally, leadership development. Again, communities of practice in spaces like the HFC network. And I'll turn it over to Minerva to tell you how you can get involved in the HFC network.
Thank you, Amanda. So hopefully we've whetted your appetite for learning more about the Hunger Free Communities Network. So we, of course, are promoting a theory of change and working with our partners in the Hunger Free Communities Network. These are groups from around the country who are actually moving, breathing life into these theories and actually doing the hard work of collaboration that are resulting in some amazing wins across the country around food security. And so if you're interested in starting a Hunger Free Community Initiative, being part of a Hunger Free Community Initiative, or engaging with us here at the Alliance to End Hunger, we invite you to do that. So you can go to our website at the Alliance to End Hunger .org, and you'll see there under our programs, the Hunger Free Communities Network Initiative. We actually have an application on our website. You can always email me. My email is here, mdelgado at alliance10hunger.org. And since you're watching this during the Hunger Free Communities Summit, the Alliance has a sponsor booth as part of the summit. And if you go to our sponsor booth, you'll also see how to connect with us and also how to join the Hunger Free Communities Network. Thank you so much for your attention. Thank you, Amanda, for joining me today and being such a wonderful thought partner on all of this work. And we hope to hear from you. Thank you.